Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar brought to you by Bursa Malaysia and managed by our company LifeChamp. Our webinar title today is BRICS, what it means to Malaysia. So my name is Shen Chu. I'm the moderator for this session. Now, Malaysia has joined BRICS as a partner country. So what does it really means to Malaysia, right? With all the shifting global dynamics, new alliances forming around the world. So there's a lot of stake for a small country like us. So how will Malaysia adapt to these changes and what opportunities can we seize in this evolving global landscape? So today we're going to explore Malaysia's position on the world stage and how does the future hold for our economy, industries and trade relations. Now, in this webinar, our disclaimer here is that whatever we share in this session is only for educational purpose. So in no way that we give any recommendation for you to buy or sell any listed securities that we mentioned here. If you decide to make any investment decisions, you are solely responsible for all your investment risk. Allow me to briefly introduce our speaker today. He is a full-time investor, author, and trainer. He has almost 30 years of investment experience in Bursa and 14 years of investment experience in foreign markets such as Hong Kong, Singapore, Nasdaq, New York Stock Exchange, ASX, and also London Stock Exchange. He is a best-selling author of Invest in Foreign Shares and Invest in REITs. He has also published 3 ebooks, which is Global Economic Collapse, 2003 and 2004, and Chinese Astrology and Global Trends with Evelyn Tan. He also recently published the book Unlock Your Wealth Potential, which Evelyn Tan, which is available in major local bookstores and other platforms. His area of expertise includes geoeconomics, geopolitics, and broad sectors in the resource industry and REITs. He has 8 years of experience teaching retail investors in local stock as well as global stocks. Academy-wise, he graduated from National University of Singapore in 1989. So it's none other than Mr. PC Wong. PC, good evening. How are you today?
Hi, good evening, Shane, and thank you all who are logging into this session.
All right, so we can't wait to hear about your perspective for Malaysia's stage, Malaysia position in the global stage through joining BRICS as a partner country. So over to you, PC.
Okay. So today's topic will discuss what is BRICS essentially and what are the objectives of BRICS, significance of BRICS in economy, population, and geopolitics. And Malaysia will become a partner of BRICS. What can Malaysia offer? How does Malaysia benefit from joining BRICS? And implications on Malaysia trades with the Western Bloc, and which sectors may benefit. Now, before we go into BRICS, I think here we'll need to draw some historical lesson. Now, this is why BRICS is important. And this is not something that is just being mentioned over the last decade or so. But if we go back into history, in 1904, Halford John Mackinder wrote an article for the Royal Geographical Society titled The Geographical Pivot of History. And Mackinder highlighted that Eurasia was 3 times the size of North America. It possessed 2/3 of the world's population and held most of the world's industrial potential. A country that dominated that landmass could overhaul any potential competitor. And herein lies the importance of BRICS. So, as a continent itself, what happens in that major Eurasian continent often herald a lot of challenges, a lot of dynamics that often led to war. Some of you all may not know it, but Europe is the continent where it has the most wars in history. And other parts of the Asia continent were subject to colonialism for 1 or 2 centuries. So that shows how important that Eurasia continent is to major powers of dating back centuries ago. So what is BRICS? Now, it is an acronym which was coined by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill in his report in 2001. At that time, it was just BRIC. The S hasn't come in yet. So his report was called the Building Better Global Economic of BRICS, where the S is still a small s, okay? And BRICS initially stood for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Eventually, South Africa joined BRICS community on 24th December 2010. Now, new members countries were added in 2024, including Iran, UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia, and 2025, Indonesia. Saudi Arabia was invited to join, but the kingdom delayed its membership. Argentina was also invited, but the membership was declined. So in 2025, new partner countries were added, including Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Belarus, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Bolivia, Cuba, Algeria, Uganda, and Nigeria. So if we look at the comparison of countries, of course, the original BRICS consists of 5, and at that time, there were a lot of comparison with the G7. But with the new BRICS, including Indonesia, Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, and UAE, okay, Saudi Arabia, we won't count as yet. The amount of countries right now surpass the number of G7 countries. So a brief history of BRICS. So on 20 September 2006, the first BRIC ministerial meeting was held at the proposal of Russian President Vladimir Putin on the margins of a UN General Assembly session in New York. The meeting was attended by foreign ministers of Russia, Brazil, and China, along with India's defense minister. They expressed interest in expanding multilateral cooperation. Now, BRICS is not a military-driven alliance. It is purely for economy. On 16 May 2008, Yekaterinburg hosted the BRIC foreign ministers meeting at Russia's initiative. Following the meeting, a joint communique was issued reflecting common stances on topical global development issues. Another important step was taken on 9 July 2008 when Russian President Dmitry Medvedev met with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. So India Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Chinese President Hu Jintao on the sidelines of the G8 summit in Tokyo, Japan on the Russian initiative. So the Russian initiative actually on hosting the BRIC on 16 June 2009, and following that, a document was issued, a document of statement outlining their shared objective. Now, this document set forth the goals of BRIC to promote dialogue and cooperation among our countries in an incremental, proactive, pragmatic, open, and transparent way. It emphasized that BRIC cooperation not only serves the common interests of emerging market economies and developing countries, but also contributes to building a harmonious world of lasting peace and shared prosperity. Additionally, the document outlined a common approach to addressing the global financial and economic crisis. Now, if you look at the date, it was on 16 June 2009. The global economic crisis actually happened in the years of towards the end of 2007 and throughout 2008. So South Africa joined BRICS community on 24th December 2010. So what are the objectives of BRICS? So this is the joint statement, again, a repetition, but it is important to know that since then, BRICS has continually evolved, okay? And in many countries, eager to join the BRICS community. And herein, we will explore why. So one of the key things is that a lot of countries are very worried of the long arm of the US law, where the US can weaponize the US dollar to enforce compliance among nations. Failure to comply may result in sanctions or tariffs imposed by the US government. Additionally, the US could restrict a country's access to the US dollar, effectively preventing it from trading with other nations. Beyond these restrictions, imposed sanctions can further pressure a country into submission. And these measures are aimed to preserve the US dollar hegemony. So you can see that as long as countries among themselves are subject to sanctions or tariffs, they will eventually try to find cooperation among themselves. And why is the protection of the US dollar hegemony is so important? Now, international trade is done in the US dollar. And why the US dollar plays an important role, not only to international trade, but more essentially to the US. Because the US can print a lot of money, okay, can print a lot of dollars, and insist that trade is done in US dollars, so that the US, despite the heavy money printing, never had a very severe inflation, except the one that happened in 1970 to 1980. Now, before 1971, the US dollar is backed by gold. So throughout the period before that, there is no severe inflation other than during the Second World War. But subsequently, after the US removed the backing of the US dollar with gold, inflation started to rise. So that was when Henry Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia and insisted that oil to be traded in US dollar, so that in exchange, the Saudi Arabia kingdom will be protected by US military. And henceforth, the petrodollar is born. So what happened is that as long as countries traded in US dollar, the US can print as much as it's like, buy goods from via the US dollar. And because the countries trade in US dollar, they need to hold US dollar in their reserves. So these reserves, if you hold so much US dollar, these reserves are then recycled to the US into US treasuries. So US treasuries are bonds that are issued by the US government, and that allows the US to incur tremendous debt without really experiencing severe inflation. Any country that prints a lot of currency will immediately be labeled as very weak, okay, and then would see inflation skyrocketing. And that's why you will see a lot of countries during the last 5 decades or so, they have bouts of hyperinflation. Most recently, like in Egypt, Turkey, in Venezuela, you know, so all these countries doesn't have access to all these countries, okay, they try to print money to stimulate the economy, but it doesn't work in that manner. Okay, much more so countries like Iran and Venezuela are subject to sanctions and were prevented to have access to US dollar for trade. And that's why you see a lot of the society are living very harsh life. Okay, so that is why countries finally decided, hey, you know, is there any option for us to work among themselves for more equal say in the global economic pie? So that step, provides the first step towards what we right now call the dollarization. So in February 2022, when Russia launched its special military operation in Ukraine, it was banished from the SWIFT system and the central bank's reserves seized by the collective West. This opened a Pandora's box where a central bank's asset could be seized by the collective West based on their rules-based international order. So although there were past instances such as the seizure of Libya's gold, Venezuela gold, and Afghanistan foreign reserves, the scale of sanctions and simultaneous seizure of Russia's central bank reserves and Russian citizen private assets have never been done in history. So the basis for reserve currency is always trust. By seizing a central bank's reserves, that trust is lost. This signals to other sovereign states that they could face similar actions if they fall on the wrong side of the collective West rules-based international order. In fact, you can see right now, a lot of countries are trying to move away from the US dollar, although BRICS right now have 10 partners, but more countries are right now approaching BRICS and say, we want to join the community. So what is the BRICS alternative? BRICS offers an alternative where countries can trade among themselves using local currencies via swap agreements. They are no longer exposed to the long arm of US law. The New Development Bank, or BRIC Bank previously as it is known, provides financing for economic development without imposing political beliefs or agendas on borrowing nations. So sometimes when countries, like during the 1997 Asia financial crisis, a lot of governments were approaching the IMF for loans. So what the IMF stated is that you must open up your economy, okay? You must do this, you must do that. So that then see they are forced to open their economy. Therefore, it opened for investment into the country of many important businesses where some governments prefer it to be held by locals instead of foreigners. So trading in local currencies also reduced the cost of transactions as the US dollar no longer serves as an intermediary. Now, countries no longer need to hold vast amount of US dollar reserves, allowing them to diversify their portfolio, their economic with the US dollar's cyclical fluctuations driven by the Federal Reserve interest rate policies. So during the time when the US dollar was low and interest rate low, you can see a lot of governments or even private enterprises borrowing US dollar because it's cheap. So what happened when the Fed start to increase interest rate dramatically? So it causes the steep appreciation of the US dollar, and the cost of borrowing the US dollar also increases. So therefore, it exerts a burden on repayment of interest for US dollar loans. And this is how the Federal Reserve play its role, okay? Because during the up and down cycle of the economy, they will cut interest rate, and when inflation interest rate borrowing on the low, eventually have to pay a much higher value US dollar, and on top of that, higher interest for refinancing. So if, let's say, countries are able to trade among themselves, that risk is also avoided. So what is the significance of BRICS? Now, BRICS today has a combined population of 3.5 billion people, nearly half of the world's population. BRICS have a combined GDP by PPP of approximately 41.4% of the global GDP by PPP. Now, previous years, a lot of people like to associate how strong a country's GDP is by looking at the nominal GDP. So if we look at the nominal GDP, then, US is the richest country in the world. But if we look at the society right now in the US, they are not enjoying the best of their lives, okay? Because US average population lifespan have actually fallen down, okay? And on top of that, there's the Gini coefficient, which measure the gap between the rich and the poor have actually widened tremendously, okay? And US middle class is being decimated. And just recently, the number of homeless people in the US have reached another record high. So, or to that extent, sometimes people like to measure by using GDP by capita. So those are actually very outdated metrics. And more recently, we see financial institutions such as the IMF and World Bank start to exert the importance of GDP by PPP, because $1 that is spent in Malaysia may have more purchasing power than a $1 that is spent in the US. Likewise, in other countries as well. So that is why there is a change of perception in how GDP is to be calculated. And according to a report by IRIS, published on 30th May 2024, BRICS with Saudi Arabia accounts for 43.1% of global oil production and 44% of reserves, as well as 35.5% of global gas production and 53% of reserves. So if you recall back the earlier statement by Mackinder, then you realize why the continent, the Eurasian continent itself is so important. And just for sharing, among the top global oil producers, 5 of them are actually from BRICS, if we include Saudi Arabia. Okay, so in terms of food commodities, BRICS produces 42% of the world's wheat, 52% of its rice, and 46% of its soybeans. BRICS Plus holds a dominant position in the production and global reserves of key critical metals, such as platinum group metals, rare earth elements, precious metals, iron, nickel, and copper. In fact, the world's largest platinum group metals producer are Russia and South Africa. Okay, the rest are very small producers. So nickel is actually, Indonesia actually holds the world's largest nickel deposit. So if we look at the top 10 countries, by PPP, China is ranked number 1 with 37.07 trillion. US is second, and based on its economy of 29.17 trillion, India at 16.02 trillion, Russia at 6.91 trillion, Japan at 6.57 trillion, Germany at 6.07 trillion, Brazil at 4.7 trillion, Indonesia at 4.66 trillion, France at 4.36 trillion, and UK at 4.28 trillion. So out of these 10 countries, 5 of them are from BRICS, and collectively, their GDP by PPP amounts to 69.36 trillion, or 59.9% of the total. So you can see that the BRICS economy is really very, very huge. So if we look at Malaysia trade with the top 10 countries, okay, with China from 2008 and to 2023, our trade with China has grown by 387%. Whereas in the US, during the same period, it has grown only by 98.9%. India have grown by 94.3%, Russia 113%, Japan is down 3.3%, Germany is only up 22.8%, Brazil is down 37.2%, Indonesia increased by 16%, France is down 12.6%, UK at 38.9%. But you can see that the amount of growth actually is the highest with China. And collectively, if we look at other emerging economies, like from India and Russia, they have grown quite high as well, okay, versus the likes of our traditional trading partner from the Western Bloc, like UK, okay, or even Germany and France. So from 2008 to 2023, Malaysia's total trade with top 5 BRICS economies grew from 66.15 billion to 230.15 billion US dollars, representing an increase of $164 billion or 247.9%. At the same time, total trading with remaining non-BRICS countries grew from 102.93 billion to 146.78 billion, representing an increase of 43 billion or 42.9%. So you can see the great discrepancy. Okay, as BRIC continues to expand and develop, it will play an increasingly vital role in Malaysia's growth prospects. So what can Malaysia offer? Malaysia can offer the following expertise. I think Malaysia is very well known for its Islamic finance development. So countries in Central Asia, Africa, and Middle East could provide opportunities for Malaysia to support the growth of Islamic financial institutions. Many of these countries are poised to join BRICS community in the future, either as member countries or partner countries. And Islamic financing for construction, Islamic finance can also pave the way for Malaysia developers to participate in the construction projects via Islamic financing. And in terms of oil and gas collaboration, with 5 BRICS members countries among the world's top 10 oil producers and gas producers, Malaysia's expertise in the sector could help forge joint development of oil and gas fields in both member and partnership countries. Agricultural and commercial crops, Malaysia have a well-established agriculture industry, particularly in the oil palm and rubber industry. Through the BRICS Plus partnership, Malaysia can contribute to the development of commercial crops in Africa and South America. So another key thing is that the largest areas of population growth anticipated in the future would actually come from Africa, South America, as well as in Southeast Asia. So Malaysia is also one of the world's top semiconductor producers, ranking 6th globally, according to a report published by Media on 13 November 2024. So Malaysia also has a mature ICT and electronics industry. Therefore, Malaysia can help other BRICS nations and partners develop their semiconductor, ICT, and electronics industry. Now, developing the semiconductor industry may pose a bigger challenge because of a very wide sanctions that is being enforced by the US, okay, against countries which the US does not want to see those countries leapfrog in terms of technological advancement. Okay, but I think in certain electronics and ICT, maybe, okay, have better potential. So being the chair of ASEAN would allow Malaysia to bridge the gap between the two global communities, i.e. ASEAN and BRICS, to enhance cooperation. So there's a lot of things, a lot of multiple roles that Malaysia can play. Okay. But what are the challenges confronting Malaysia? Inevitably, Malaysia's participation in BRICS Plus economies could be hampered by the US. And the US is always on the lookout for countries which violate its sanctions. So like recently, we have news that US sanctioned 6 Malaysian firms for breaching embargo on Russia. So the US is actually trying to impose its sanctions through several levels, okay? And that can actually hamper some of Malaysia's ambitions. The effort by the US could hamper the entry of Malaysian companies into countries such as Iran and Russia, both of which could offer tremendous opportunities for Malaysian companies to participate in their development. For example, Iran has a very huge population. Their industry is very their industry capacity is very low, okay? But it is also a very oil-rich country and gas-rich country, which can actually open up avenues for Malaysian companies to participate in its development. So that is why, on the longer-term plan, it is one of the key ways is to move away from the US dollar and do currency swaps so that the extent of the long arm of the US dollar is being mitigated. And on top of that, I think as we move forward, there will be some restructuring in the global financial system, where several of the BRICS countries right now are embarking on a tokenized a trade that is based on a tokenized currency. Okay, although it's not widely being implemented, there are right now talks to how to actually one way to avoid sanctions and all this is to have to tokenize the trade, so that it's all withhold from the U.S. administration. So, for example, trade between Russia and Iran, they are looking at how to tokenize their trade. Okay, China already has a digital renminbi currency, and other countries are looking at ways as well. Because if let's say these countries do not tokenize, okay, their trade, okay, which means everything is in a private ledger, then it can, it can be thrown upon by prying eyes. Okay, so that over the next few years, we may see the emergence of more currencies that are tokenized, so that these countries can actually evade the detection by the US administration. So how does Malaysia benefit? Now, invariably, the BRICS community will continue to grow to include more countries. And this was published by TASS way back in 2023, where more than 40 countries expressed interest in joining BRICS, and 22 among them having already submitted official applications. So there are countries that want to get out of the economic rut that they are in. And one way to do that is to align themselves, their economy, finance, and trade with BRICS nations. Now, the above will open new markets for Malaysia as BRICS community expands, especially when Malaysia's expertise is very much needed to help other countries develop their financial, agriculture, and ICT industries. Malaysia could tap into the NDB for local currency loans with no strings attached. Transactions between countries could be lowered via dual currency swaps facility, thus avoiding the US dollar as an intermediary. So that is how a lot of countries see as a means of a way out. Because if you do trade via the US dollar as an intermediary, what happens is that ringgit change to, for example, ringgit change to US dollar, and then US dollar change to renminbi, and on the other side, and on the other side, we get the US dollar, we change it back into ringgit. So there are always some exchange costs. So how does BRICS affect Malaysia trade with the West? Now, I think there's a lot of concern. Sometimes I read in X, people commenting about, people worry about Malaysia's trade with BRICS could hamper, its relationship with with the Western Bloc. But if we look at it, these are the four countries that are from the West, the top 10 economies from the West. If you look at it, Germany's GDP, this is way back in 2017. And since that peak here, except for the pandemic, okay, where this was driven purely by a lot of pent-up demand as well as liquidity injection. But post-COVID, you can see that Germany's GDP has reached stagnation. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive, but it is always near zero. France, also similar thing. It's very close to zero. Okay, again, it's stagnating. UK GDP, it has been very, very low, on the low percentage side, but recently you can see that it's also facing stagnation. And the US GDP, okay, is seeing marginal growth. So US GDP may grow, last year grow by 2.8%, but China's GDP grew by 5%. So China is almost double of the US economy. Okay, and India's GDP is growing, grew by 7%. I think it's close to 7%. Okay, which is more than double the US GDP. So a lot of these emerging economies, okay, countries like Brazil with large population, India, and eventually Indonesia will see their economy keep on growing at a much higher rate than the Western economies. So, and another thing is that when these three major economies in Europe, Germany, France, UK, if they are reaching stagnation, that means their ability to import goods from Malaysia will be impacted, okay? Because when an economy stagnate, that means that it's low growth to no growth and high inflation. And inflation in Western countries will continue to go up, especially when you look at Europe. Essentially, Europe doesn't have a lot of natural resources. Previously, Europe is able to grow simply because of the cheap gas from Russia. You can see that after the war in Ukraine, Germany has industrial capacity have already fallen. Okay, a lot of the, like Volkswagen, is shutting down 6 plants. Okay, their industrial capacity totally, is down. Okay, France as well, and UK, is always hovering between positive and negative. That means that these economies will continue to face this kind of situation simply because they are also heavily indebted. Okay, they do not have access to cheap resources. Then how can they enjoy strong economic growth? Okay, but the funny thing is that these countries are actually buying Russian gas from India, okay, which is a markup. So that is why these countries will not be seeing that kind of economic growth that will actually draw business or create opportunities to have high imports from countries like Malaysia or other parts of ASEAN, because their economy are actually in the doldrums. And US is experiencing marginal growth, but a lot of it is driven by debt. For example, last year, US economy grew by 2.8%, but the debt increase is 1.6 times its GDP increase. So with the DOGE, or Department of Government Efficiency, right now cutting a lot of jobs, federal jobs, cutting a lot of financing to government agencies, we can potentially see the US heading much closer to a stagnation or possibly a recession. Okay, especially when a lot of the money depends on that to be circulated throughout the economy. So with all this financing being stopped, the US could see some pressure in its economy. So that's why it's also important for Malaysia to start looking out from the traditional trades trade partners, okay, from the Western Bloc, because all indications are showing that their economy is not going to do too well. Okay, so rather focus on tremendous growth opportunities where the economic pie is still rather small, but if you are in, you help to grow, then you get a bigger slice of the economic pie as this country's economy grow much bigger. Now, the UK, Germany, and France have experienced stagnant GDP growth, hovering close to 0%. All three economies are heading towards stagflation, which will crimp consumption. Europe is undergoing deindustrialization due to the unbearable energy costs. As a result, Malaysia's trade with these countries is likely to remain sluggish in the coming years. It is crucial for Malaysia to seek out growth opportunities among BRICS nations and partners while expanding intra-ASEAN trade. Meanwhile, the US remains Malaysia's second largest trading partner and continues to wield significant geopolitical influence through arbitrary sanctions on non-compliant countries. Now, this will be a major challenge for Malaysia. I think this is the part where Malaysia needs to negotiate its participation, okay, in the BRICS quite diligently, okay, to avoid undue scrutiny or actions to be taken. So therefore, Malaysia must carefully and strategically navigate its relationship with the US. So the other thing is Trump reciprocal tariffs. On 11 February 2025, President Donald Trump announced the implementation of reciprocal tariffs impacting trade with all US partners. It's like how much you tax how much duties you impose on your imports from the US, we will do likewise on yours. So in response, other trading nations are expected to impose similar tariffs, potentially affecting Malaysia as well. The impact of the tariffs will force inflation to surge in the US, thus crimping consumption and demand for goods and services. Therefore, it is equally important for Malaysia to de-risk itself from this event. This is where BRICS matters in mitigating the risk of a global trade war. So which sectors will benefit? Now, this is just some of my own conclusion, okay, provided that Malaysia is able to go in and pave its way through various options, okay? One is Islamic finance, okay, benefiting Malaysia financial institutions, construction companies involved in overseas projects, but with Islamic financing, oil and gas, overseas project and exports, BRICS nations and partners, plantation, overseas expansion and exports, electronics, chips and ICT, overseas manufacturing and exports, okay, logistic and shipping as trade with BRICS nation and partners expand. In fact, the global trade among what we call the global South countries have actually been escalating at a tremendous pace, okay? Whereas the trade with the G7 countries is accelerating. So we have talked about Germany, UK, US, but what about Japan? Japan is right now facing tremendous inflationary pressures, okay? And a lot of the Japan's juggernaut industries that previously, captured the auto sector, right now is losing pace to the Chinese auto juggernaut, okay? Nissan and Honda are really experiencing severe pressure, okay? And so are the Korean manufacturers. So that is why, the BRICS pie will continue to increase versus the G7 economic pie in the coming years, okay? So that's all I have. Hopefully, it has been an educational session for most of you all. Now we have reached our Q&A session.
Thanks, PC, for sharing your perspective on Malaysian stand in the BRICS. So if any question to ask our speaker today, please write them at the Q&A box, not the chat box, okay? Write them at the Q&A box. Okay, so the first question I have on my screen is from Kennedy. So his question is, how does currency swap arrangement work?
Okay, like I mentioned just now, if you do trade, okay, in US dollar with, let's say Malaysia trade with China, um, Malaysia need to buy US dollar. Malaysia need to buy US dollar before importing from China. So likewise, China would need to buy US dollar uh, if let's say it wants to import in Malaysia. So what can be done is that if let's say the currency swap is done, okay, the trade can be either Malaysia sell to China using ringgit or the renminbi. So sometimes this renminbi could be, if Malaysia wants to sell to China, but Malaysia say that the trade will be in renminbi. So what can happen is that Malaysia then swap ringgit to renminbi directly, okay, and then China would then get the renminbi. So sometimes there may be excess renminbi. And what can be done is that this excess, if Malaysia have excess renminbi, for example, Malaysia trade with China, Malaysia export to China, then Malaysia, instead of requesting for ringgit, it can request for renminbi. So if Malaysia have that renminbi, what can be done is that it can be used to pay for infrastructure projects done by Chinese companies and then pay them in renminbi. So in this way, it also help to maintain a balance, okay, of payments between the two countries. Hope this answer your question.
All right. So so if this works, should the demand for US dollar lowered due to US dollar devaluation? And if so, then why is the US dollar is still very strong?
Okay, first, there are two things. Number one, the US dollar tracks the US Treasury yields. Okay. So if let's say the US bond yield is high, naturally the US dollar will be high. Okay. Because that that is a psychology that is inbuilt into the system. After so many decades, okay, the perception never changed. If US bond yields goes up, then naturally the US dollar will go up. But the other thing is that some of you might say that according to the SWIFT data, US dollar is the most widely used uh, currency in global trade. Now that is according to SWIFT. SWIFT never report whatever transaction that is done through local currencies via the Chinese chips. Chips means Chinese chips is CIPS. Okay, so that is a cross-country payment system that is paid in local currency. Iran also have its own local currency. Uh, uh, they also have something similar like SWIFT, okay, but it's all local currency. So does Russia, okay. And just to share with you, Russia has managed to de-dollarize almost 100% of its trade with China. And one of the thing is that all these transactions that is in platforms that are not reported to SWIFT has been steadily increasing globally. Okay, so the US dollar will forever track the US yield. But you can see that if you think that the US dollar uh, is strong, how come gold value in US dollar is at a record high? If we want to go back all the way into history, since 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve, the US dollar actually has devalued by more than 98% versus gold. So this is what is transacting. We only see currency movement, okay? But the real value, okay, lies in measuring against gold. So hope that answer your question.
All right. Thanks, PC. So the next question is by Daniel. So would the BRICS trade impact our Bursa stock market in overall?
I
As a
think
local investor, which sector should we pay attention to?
I think that if we have to watch for the signal from the government. If Malaysia is making inroads into into certain corporation, okay, or private enterprises investment into certain countries, then that would be a signal. Like I say, right now we are in a situation where I think although a lot of companies are very eager to break into the BRICS bandwagon, but they are also doing a lot of due diligence because they are also concerned about anything that could impact, that could result in a sanction and such, like what happened to the 6 Malaysian companies by operating in Russia. So I think which companies or which I have outlined the potential sectors is whether these companies will eventually move in based on my anticipation. So it is worthwhile to look at those particular sectors and see what they announce in their cooperation with other BRICS nations. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, PC. So we have the next question from Suhaidi, who asked this question. So most of the semiconductor E&E industries export to the West. So how will joining BRICS influence positively?
I think one of the key thing is that you may not necessarily be directly exporting to uh, certain countries, okay, especially those on the US backlist. But for a lot of countries, okay, like let's say those that are off the sanction list, I believe that they are going to move up on the technology ladder. So, for example, everyone was talking about open AI, and suddenly DeepSeek comes in. Okay, DeepSeek comes in, and then everything is free. So suddenly, a lot of countries that is not on the technology map, they realize that how open, how DeepSeek has actually revolutionized the technology sphere. So these countries will also want to look at how can we harvest the computing power. Okay, so that the computing power is not monopolized by the US or China. Even countries who want to actually improve the application of AI into their economies, then that gives reasons for Malaysia to export, okay, our products to them if they want to build out their, let's say, data centers. Okay, it may not be cheap, it could be consultancy, or it can also be how to start from the very basic. Okay, hope that's answer your question.
All right. Um, so the next question is by Daniel. What other currency platform besides SWIFT can a country use and can Malaysia company leverage on?
Right now, it is all through individual countries having their own exchange system. For example, I mentioned China have chips. I think the Russia have Mir, if I'm not wrong. Okay, Iran also have its own, but way before um, the the BIS, Bank of International Settlement, pulls out of a platform called the mBridge. The mBridge is actually a, a payment link among a few countries. I think it was set up by Thailand, UAE, Hong Kong, and another country I can't recall. So that mBridge was supposed to be a platform where BRICS countries can actually do trade outside the US dollar. But I believe that the BIS came under tremendous pressure from the US, and therefore the BIS actually pulled out from the mBridge. Whether I think the mBridge could still be a viable platform because it can link to multiple countries, okay, where they can do transaction in local currencies. When it was tested, I think a few years ago, it actually managed to do transaction during that testing period amounting to few $100 million. So I believe that the Enbridge project may not be dead, but it could be happening without participation from the BIS. So if let's say the Enbridge becomes the viable platform, then we can see more BRICS countries adopting to the Enbridge. But so far, I've not come across further news other than that the BIS decided to opt out of the system. So hope that answers your question.
All right. So you know that China and India are in BRICS, right? And we also know that these two countries don't get along very well. So we have this question from Mahalingam who want to ask you about your view.
I think based on recent uh, discussion, okay, between China and India, I think they are finally working on something to improve the cross-border relationship. I think one of the first gesture is that they should pull out some kilometers away from the border so that they would not be in contact with each other. And I think that like recent visit of Modi into US, you can see that Trump has tried to play an upmanship versus the India Prime Minister. And I think to a lot of people watching it, it doesn't sit well with the Indian nation. Okay. So I think that the India's Prime Minister could also be acknowledging that the US just care for itself, okay? And therefore, we may see India relationship with China, while it will not ignite into a lot of dispute, but I believe that India will work more closely with Russia, and potentially there are right now a number of economies from India are highlighting that India needs to work with China, especially on manufacturing. Okay, that this is because Indian manufacturing capacity have actually declined over the past few years. So the only way is for India to tap on to modernize its manufacturing is China. And China actually accounts to 30 over percent. I think it's close to 33 or 35% of entire global manufacturing. So there's no country that can beat China on that scale. So that is why some economies in India are actually encouraging, that India should encourage Chinese manufacturers to come into China. But let's see. Okay, as far as I know, the border dispute, they have tried to walk away from it, okay, to make the situation calm. Hope that's answered your question.
All right. So the next question is by Henry. Now, since more countries may be trading in renminbi, so should we start investing in renminbi?
I think if you ever want to invest in currency, um, unless you are a trader, but if you really want to protect your wealth, the best option is gold. Okay, hope that's answered your question.
All right. Um, so Xiu Ming asked this question: what is the underlying rationale when US Treasury yield is up, then the US dollar will also go up?
Actually, like I say, it's based on decades of brainwashing. Now, the thing is that when the yield goes up, it means that because when the yield goes up, it's like creating a pressure for the Federal Reserve to increase interest rate. Okay, because the federal interest rate works, is almost in tandem with how the US 10-year Treasury behaves. So if let's say the US 10-year Treasury move up in terms of yield, then that creates a pressure for the Fed to increase interest rate as well. Because the US Treasury yield is a reflection of the US inflation. If expectation of inflation goes up in the US, the 10-year Treasury will move up. And because of the 10-year Treasury moving up, the Fed would also have to move its interest rate in tandem. So if let's say that is happening, the market believe that since the Fed will be moving in tandem with the 10-year Treasury, then they will likely increase interest rate, then might as well convert my investment into US dollar and buy and put it in the savings, or use that US dollar to invest in bonds. Okay, so that is why that creates the demand for the US dollar.
Right, thanks, PC. So the next question by Chang is that as micro business, how does joining BRIC benefit us?
I think one of the key things is that if Malaysia moves ahead with a lot of transaction being done via currency swap, I think one of the key things is that we could perhaps see less severe move of inflation, okay? Because we no longer rely so much on a lot of transaction using the US dollar, okay? And the cost of financing debt, okay, could be lower if let's say we can borrow in different currencies. Okay, that would be an immediate that would be a likely impact on much lower inflation. But like I say, how inflation behaves, is closely linked to um, government's debt and how government manage uh, manage the financial system. So if let's say the cost of financing may be lowered, but if let's say the debt keeps on rocketing higher, then inflation will still be there. But to the layman, if let's say there's more trade is done in local currency, then there's less reliance on the US dollar, especially when the US dollar can be very volatile. Sometimes it may keep going up because of the inflation right now in the US. Then, to the layman, we no longer need to rely on the US dollar, and therefore the trade, okay, could be done much more in local currency and benefit the general population. Provided, okay, that is not imported, goods not imported from the US, but imported from elsewhere through local currencies. And I think right now, ASEAN among themselves are also looking at trading in local currencies. So let's say Malaysia trade with Indonesia, trade with Thailand in local currencies, then the likelihood of impact on inflation would be much lesser.
Right. So the follow-up question is that why last year Malaysian ringgit performed badly against the US dollar, and would our participation mitigate Malaysian ringgit risk?
So why Malaysia performed badly, okay, is because of the high yield in the US Treasury. And right now, if you look at it, at some point in time, the US 10-year Treasury was at 4.8%. So that the uh, creates the value for the US dollar, and the US dollar rise in value versus other currencies. But since then, okay, like right now, the US Treasury, 10-year Treasury has fallen down to about 4.35%. You can see that the US dollar has weakened as well. At one point, okay, it is I think close to one. You have to, if you want to keep track the behavior of the US dollar, don't just look at US dollar and ringgit, but look at the DXY, okay, which is the dollar index. So if the DXY moves up in tandem with the US Treasury yield, then that means that likelihood the US dollar will appreciate in value. But since then, the US Treasury yield has fallen. We can see that the ringgit versus the US dollar is no longer at 4.6. Right now it's sitting at close to about 4.41 or 4.42. Hope that's answered your question.
Mm. Kennedy would like to ask this question. So is BRICS a trading bloc or it is a cooperation? So how could
Okay.
BRICS effectively challenge the Western economic blocs on international financial system?
Now, BRICS, for most part, is actually a trading bloc. It is nothing to do with any bloc alliance and such. But BRICS is significant because it is showing the way that you need not be a bloc to reap the benefit of global trade. Okay, so it is like, throwing out the book that is written by the West on how economy or trade should be done. Okay, but BRICS now is showing to others that as a community, we can work for the common good of our countries. So that is the most important thing. You need not be a certain bloc to impose sanctions and tariff against other countries to benefit economic growth. And that is the most important question, most important point that BRICS is driving. Hope that answers your question.
So is BRICS moting the commodity-backed currencies to challenge the US dollar?
I think there are conflicting views, okay, whether BRICS should have its own currency. But if you look at what all the central banks are doing globally, one thing is common. They are actually accumulating gold, okay? And recently, the US is importing a lot of gold into the US. So there's a speculation that there could be a gold revaluation so that it boosts up the price of gold, because this may sound quite ridiculous, but in the balance sheet of the US government, gold as per ounce basis never changed from 1971. It is still entered in at $42 or $43 per ounce. So the thing is, US right now is pulling in a lot of gold from the world into the US. And that with the intention that some speculate will be revaluation of gold. So if let's say gold is revalued to the current price, then the US would certainly have a windfall of close to $800 billion, which the US then can use to pay down its debt, okay, or to stimulate the economy. So these are the speculation side. But no doubt, a lot of central banks right now are buying gold, okay, in preparation for a lot of uncertainties, okay. Hope that answers your question.
But they are recently, you said they are recently importing or buying golds, right? So when they are recently buying golds, I thought it should be, um, I mean, they bought at the current price, but if the balance sheet is, the balance sheet value go at 43 US dollar per ounce, then there should be immediate impairment the moment they bought the gold, right?
Okay, actually the gold trade is more in depth, okay. The thing is that the there's a lot of trade, okay, that are driven by um, paper derivatives, okay. So what happened is that a lot of all these were done much earlier. So the thing is that when they buy, okay, yes, that price may be but it's not, how to say, sometimes it may not be the US government that is buying, okay. So what it does is that it wants the pull in the gold and then have the gold stored in the US. You know what I mean? Through all the paper derivatives and so forth. So there's also, borrowing of like the LBMA. Right now they have shortage of gold. So it doesn't mean that the LBMA may be buying gold to sell to the US dollar, to sell to the US government. What the LBMA is doing right now is they're borrowing gold from other central banks to shift to the US. Okay, so what happened is that when all these things start to clear up, there's only one thing that's happening. Gold will keep on going higher because there's not enough gold. So if they buy, let's say not necessarily today, but weeks ago, if the gold price continue to go up, it will still create additional value. Okay, and there's a lot of talks that one of the way to get out of it is to quickly revalue the gold. So the thing is that that gold in the US dollar is valued at 42 or 43. That sits in the balance sheet, but a lot of people know that the US doesn't have the gold. Okay, so whatever that is moved into that can be revalued higher, but all others that is bought at whatever price will be put separately. Okay, but the most important thing is to how to revalue that 42 ounce so that it create a huge windfall. So it may be the banks that are buying, okay, but then the US say you must store over here. You know what I mean? So it may not be the US government, but the gold movement is actually moving from elsewhere into the US, you know. So there's a lot of shenanigans in the global gold market, okay? But we can't go into full detail here.
All right. Thanks, PC. The next question is from Mahalingam Pakiri. Since our trading with China is huge, will we head towards the direction like Sri Lanka took, which is towards bankruptcy?
Okay, I think first of all, this is a Western-driven narrative, okay? That is used to badmouth the BRI. You can go into any website, you go and look at Sri Lankan debt, not from the US, all the newspaper media from the Western side, but different channels that actually explain the Sri Lankan debt. Now, for your information, the Sri Lankan debt with the Chinese hold, okay, is only 11%. India holds another 11%. 70% is held by who? IMF and US private institutions. So that bankruptcy doesn't come from that 11% from China, but it is used as a narrative for, to pursue, to create, to badmouth the BRI as a debt-based driven kind of reliance. Okay, but you go and look at the Sri Lankan debt structure. 70% is owned by IMF, BlackRock, Vanguard, all the private institutions from the US. Okay, so you can go to like the situation in Ukraine. Before the 2014 Maidan, there was a pro-Russia president. He wants to borrow X amount of money from Russia, and then the IMF said, you can't do that. You need to borrow from us. So eventually he was disposed, and eventually the Ukraine under the new presidency borrowed from the IMF. You know what are the conditions? The conditions is that Ukraine must free up a big portion of its agricultural land for investment from the US. So this is the real debt trap. Okay, just like the debt trap that has inspired the Asian financial crisis. But because most of the media is owned by Western alliance, we often see from Reuters, we often see from MSBC, MSN, all those, it's always very negative, especially BBC. Okay, has any country actually talked good about other Asian countries? For example, during 1997 financial crisis, when Malaysia chose not to borrow from the IMF, did you see how the entire Western news media badmouth Malaysia, that say that Malaysia is on the road to doom? So that is how they play it. Okay, so need to be a bit more open-minded and look not at the news, but go into the real essence of how that debt is structured. Then that may surprise you. Okay, hope that answered your question.
Yep. So Malaysia should be safe in trading in China. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for the analysis of the breakdown of the debt by Sri Lanka. Um, so the next question here is, what are the potential risks for Malaysia in strengthening the ties with the BRICS countries?
Actually, I think because the BRICS is not a political, it's not a political bloc. It is a it is a it is a trading corporation entity. So when there's no feeling of demand for political reform or demand for uh, other countries in exchange for this, then that means that the corporation is very transparent. Okay, there's no imposition of demands on each other. So I think that should thrive. Okay.
All right. So does BRIC have any trading framework for the member countries or partner countries?
I think that like because it's not a block, okay, like the EU, it has this list of requirements, okay, but these are actually as a community, Malaysia has the option to talk directly with Iran or talk directly to Russia or talk directly to India without needing approval, let's say from China. Okay, so it is an open thing because it is a trade. There's no guideline that how how you should behave, and all those. Because always remember, it's not a block that is instituted. It is a community of shared belief. Okay.
Okay. So what is the status of current Malaysian membership? Have we applied for a full membership yet pending for their approval? So in your opinion, should we actively seek to become to join BRICS, and what steps should we take?
I think it is most important. I mean, I can only provide my own opinion. Okay, I'm not part of the government. I'm not speaking on behalf of the government, but I think as a partner first, I think it plays well into Malaysia scope because Malaysia then can start experiencing baby steps on how to actually um, how to actually build up the relationship among other countries, among other partners, to eventually decide whether whether Malaysia wants to join BRICS as a full member or not. Now, just for example, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was invited to join BRICS, but they declined. But that doesn't stop investment from China going into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Okay, because it is by own free will. So Malaysia have to experience being a partner and in the process learn more. Okay. And if let's say one day Malaysia decides to become a full member, then perhaps uh the government may think that the time is right to do so. But I think getting as a partner will is the right option. Also because the BRICS community, the main BRICS members have already said that there are so many applications, we cannot allow everyone to become a member until we finalize a lot of things. Now, hidden inside those statements are some very important meaning. For example, okay, what if they say that we can't accept any more new members until we have a full-scale trade settlement system? That could be the reason, okay? Because they have hinted that we cannot have so many bilateral, one country have so many bilateral swaps with so many other countries. But what if we have a common system where the swaps can actually happen, okay? And it's all on a platform. So I think that's one thing that they could be working on, which is why I think that's the aim of the mBridge. But until that platform is ready, I don't think the major BRICS partners would be readily accepting so many new members into it. Hope that answers your question.
Yep. So have we applied to be a full member yet or not yet?
That is upon invitation. Or whether yes or not, I've not come across it, but I believe that Malaysia has shown interest to want to join, okay, and therefore was accepted as a partner because I think during one of the BRICS summit in Russia, the Russian already stated we are not going to allow many new members in. So that itself is already a statement that they are not going to send out invitation. Okay, you can apply, but you need to be invited first. The other thing is that they settle for partners instead because they feel that for it allowed time for them to get used to the to 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 the BRICS community, okay, to see the benefit, okay, because that's I don't think they are ready to have so many members until they have a proper trade settlement system uh, that works for everyone.
All right. So, um, what will Trump do to avoid dollarizations, and how will that impact BRIC countries?
So you say anyone who wants to de-dollarize, he will impose 100% tariff law. But I think whatever it is, it's only going to spur inflation in the US. Okay. Um, you must understand, US have lost its, China's manufacturing capacity is more than double the US in terms of manufacturing capacity. But what China manufacture is a lot of goods. And most of what US manufacture are actually weapons. So there's no manufacturing facility in the US that actually manufacture the goods that China can provide. So whatever he wants to impose the tariff, it will just be passed on to the consumer. Hope that's answer your question.
Okay, let's do one last question by Jane. So, will platinum and silver have the same value as gold in the future? If yes, how could this happen?
Okay, I need to quote a person who once said, gold is the money of royalty. Silver is the money of gentlemen. And is uh that is the money of peasants. Okay, so that goes to show anything, gold will always sit much higher. Silver is being very widely manipulated by the uh by 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 the bullion banks. Why? Because silver is in every electronics that we use. Okay, and all these electronics are hardly recycled. They are in the landfills. Silver is used in the making of weapons, and these weapons are never recycled because they are strewn across the battlefield. So there is shortage of silver. In fact, shortage of silver has been around since 2022, if I'm not wrong. But they continue to suppress the price of silver simply because if silver is allowed to rise, then the cost of electronics would rise in tandem. Okay, and because of that, silver is very volatile. Okay, some people might say that the silver to gold ratio right now is 90, but during the bull market in 2011, it was 30. So it implies that if the gold to silver ratio reach 30, then silver would be 3x its current price. So, but that again, like I say, if silver were to 3x, it will be, it can happen very fast because suddenly there's acute shortage. But for protection of wealth, gold is still the best choice. Now, platinum is never used as a reserve by banks. Silver is not even used as a reserve by banks. Okay. Bank reserves only place importance to gold, and that is why gold, according to the BIS, is a tier one asset, not silver, not platinum. So if let's say you want to save for wealth protection, then you do what other central banks are doing. Okay, hope that answer your question.
All right, so we have come to the end of the Q&A session. So thank you everybody for staying till until the end of this session. Hope that you have gained insights into this topic, BRICS, and know how to position yourself well in this new evolving investment landscape. So thank you, PC, for sharing your perspective on the BRICS, this topic.
Yep. Hope you all enjoyed the session. Thank you. Good night.
All right. So for our next webinar, it's going to be conducted in Mandarin. So it's titled "如何打造你的投资大蓝图." It's happening on the 3rd of March, next Monday, 8:30 to 10 p.m. So if you want to learn how do you build your investment blueprint, you may register for this session that's going to be conducted in Mandarin. So I've just given you the registration link in the chat box. Okay. So if you want to open a new trading account, you may scan the QR code or click the link I've just given you in the chat box for you to express your interest. Then we'll do our best to match you with your preferred broker. So with that, thank you everybody for staying tuned until the end of this webinar. Hope that you find this session valuable and useful. So we'll see you in our next webinar on next Monday. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye bye.